All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a fascinating puzzle, a real contradiction that sits right at the heart of a modern economy. This is all based on an analysis called the contradiction. Okay, so let's just jump right in. On one side, you have this really strong official message, right? A public stance against what's called culture, basically handouts or freebies. But then, on the other side, you have the very same government running the world's largest free food program. I mean, how does that even work? How can both of these things be true at once? That's what we're going to unpack. All right, first up, let's really look at that official stance. The argument against these freebies, it wasn't just some dry policy debate. No, it was framed as this big, serious warning, both morally and for the country's finances. So you'd hear things like, free electricity or bus rides get called out as, fiscally reckless or morally corrosive. The idea was that this kind of thing was just irresponsible populism. And by doing this, the government could position itself as the responsible one, the disciplined, reform-minded group that's making the tough calls for the future. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, even as this message got louder and louder, the complete opposite was happening with food. While all these smaller subsidies were being criticized, a truly massive one was getting bigger and bigger. We're talking about the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, or PMGKA. Get this, it provides free food grains to over 800 million people. That's more than half the entire population. And what's wild is that it started as this temporary thing during the pandemic, but now it's a long-term permanent fixture. Now, the analysis we're looking at argues this wasn't just some act of generosity. It was basically an admission, a quiet acknowledgement that the economy just wasn't creating enough jobs or opportunities for a huge chunk of the population to feed themselves. So that leads to the big question, right? Why was food treated as this special case, completely different from all those other so-called freebies? Let's dig into that. Why is food different? Well, according to this analysis, it all comes down to a very clear, very cold political calculation. When it comes to governing, food is just non-negotiable. Think about it. You can push back a transport subsidy, you can delay a new program, but you absolutely cannot delay hunger. The politics of hunger are immediate and they are unforgiving. So the argument goes, guaranteeing food becomes the ultimate safety net, the last line of defense against widespread social unrest. And this is how the contradiction gets resolved, through something the author calls selective morality. A very clear line gets drawn in the sand. Food isn't a freebie, it's a moral necessity. It's not a handout, it's essential support. See the difference? It's a total reframing. And that distinction, well, it wasn't really an economic one. It was political. This really gets to the core of the argument. The goal wasn't just to feed people, it was to manage society. Providing food keeps things stable, it keeps order, but it does so without giving people the power to demand more, things like better jobs or higher wages. This strategy has a really powerful side effect, something the analysis describes as a kind of political anesthetic. So here's how that works. The state provides for your most basic need, survival. It feeds you. And in return, the citizen waits. That feeling of urgency to demand bigger structural changes, like where are the jobs, it kind of fades into the background. What you're left with is a situation where gratitude for that basic survival starts to replace the demand for real progress. The whole political conversation gets reshaped. Okay, but there's another layer to this. The policy also creates what you could call a fiscal illusion. Now, on the surface, just handing out grain that's already in storage, it seems cheaper than, say, giving people cash, right? But the analysis argues this hides some massive opportunity costs. I mean, think about it. All the resources, the money, the logistics, the focus that are locked into just providing basic calories, what else could that have been used for? It could have gone into diversifying nutrition or strengthening healthcare or improving schools or funding projects that actually create jobs. Instead of transforming the economy, the focus stays on just managing it. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most powerful part of this whole analysis. What is this contradiction really a diagnosis of? What does it tell us about the state of the economy? Well, the argument is that the biggest consequence might actually be psychological. When providing mass food aid becomes permanent, it means that widespread distress has become normalized. It's just part of the system now. A society that's fed but isn't really moving forward learns to accept that stagnation as normal. So you see, in the end, The contradiction wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was a strategy that worked. It allowed the state to preserve its moral authority by condemning other kinds of handouts, while at the same time ensuring social stability by feeding the vulnerable. It let them avoid the much harder problem of creating jobs, and it reinforced a sense of dependence instead of empowerment. And this leads to the author's really powerful final point. When free food becomes a permanent fixture, it's no longer just welfare, it's a diagnosis. A diagnosis of an economy where the big growth numbers we hear about haven't actually translated into secure, stable jobs for most people. So we'll leave you with this final thought-provoking question that this analysis raises. What happens when the absence of hunger becomes the ceiling of ambition? It's a really crucial question about the trade-offs we make between short-term stability and long-term progress. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.